Welcome back to our Creating Your Sync System video series here on my YouTube channel. And this video, we're going to talk about how you should be preparing your DAW sessions like a pro. Up until this video, you may have been not preparing your sessions at all, and that's what's left you hitting writer's block probably way more often than you need to, getting lost in the weeds, trying to find that perfect kick drum or that perfect piano sample and spending, 15, 20, maybe even an hour trying to find it. And by the time you find it, you've lost the original creative spark, and the energy and the motivation for your entire project has just gone out the window. So that's what amateurs do. They don't prepare. They don't set up an environment to be productive and for success. But if you are going to be a professional sync licensing producer and be consistently cranking out production music, you're going to need to do this. And this is literally something that takes 10, 15 minutes at the start of your session. And once you do it once, you're kind of set. You don't have to keep doing it every single time you get creative. But it's these little tiny changes you can make in your approach that I think will have exponential payoffs into the future of your career. So let's get started. First off, amateurs start with blank canvases, and it's professionals that preload their sessions, okay? So up until this point, if you've just been opening up your Logic or your Ableton or your Pro Tools or your Fruity Loops or whatever, and it's just blank, and then you're starting to create music with a blank session, that's what amateurs do. I'm not saying that you can't be successful doing it that way. If it works for you, great. But if you've been having some struggles staying productive, hitting those writer's block moments, and not finishing your tracks, this is something that you should really give a try very seriously, okay? So we're gonna start preloading our session starting today. What does that mean? Well, you're gonna load up all of your go-to sounds and plugins before you make your music, okay? So you're gonna have all of your drums preloaded. You're gonna go sample them before you even come up with creative ideas. This would be a good idea to have a reference track so you know what you want your track to sound like, okay? We'll talk about that in a second. But go find the piano before you craft a piano tune. Go find the guitars, go find the horns, the strings, the transition effects, the crash cymbals. Every element should be preloaded into your session before you created the first note of your music. And again, if you use a reference track, you know what kind of piano you probably want to use, you know what sort of guitar sound, what sort of effects you want that guitar to have, what drums, if you want the drums to be big and spacious like they're in a big cathedral, or if you want them to be small and tight like a little drum room. Make all of those decisions before the music starts flowing and the creativity starts coming out of you, okay? You don't want to be in the middle of a creative idea and go, okay, I got to throw a great bass guitar on here, and then have to go search through 50 or 100 or 200 different presets to try to find the right bass sound. Have it ready before you get started. You also want to create different templates for each genre or subgenre that you create. So like I said, once you do this once for, let's say, your, EDM pop sample track that you want to basically put together, you can basically use that same sound palette for all the tracks that you're going to create in that style. Of course, maybe you want to have a couple of different templates for some other, one that's more party themed, one that's more romantically sounding, one that's more just optimistic and energetic. So you can have all these sub templates that all belong in the, sort of umbrella genre or the mood that you're going for. But you definitely want to have go-to templates that you can go reach out to and use over and over again as you see fit. And of course, you can update them. So let's say there's one EDM plucked synth that you've been using for quite a few of your tracks. You're like, that's kind of played out. The next time you open up that DAW template, swap that sound out, get a new one, swap out a couple of the different samples, and then that now becomes your new go-to for the next 4 to 5 maybe EDM tracks that you're going to start producing and composing, okay? So obviously you need to be the judge on how much is using the same sound sounding too similar, like where you're making cover songs of previous tracks. Definitely don't want to do that. But there's definitely a useful tool here where you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time you start a new track, okay? You also want to create a mastering plugin template. So for my tracks, I usually use the same 3 or 4 mastering plugins. Usually it's going to be a linear EQ, it's going to be a stereo spreader, and then usually maybe a little bit of compression, overall compression, and an adaptive limiter, and a limiter of some sort. And that's it. So I usually have the same 4 plugins that are basically enabled on every single one of my tracks. And of course, I will go play with their settings to adjust depending on if I'm using, am I making a hip hop track, an EDM track, an orchestral track, kind of depends, a rock track. And also, is this an extremely loud track? Is this a track that has some dynamics to it? All that kind of stuff. So I'll adjust all of these plugins, but I'm not reinventing my entire mastering process and my mixing process every single time I make a track. I would not be able to keep up with the workflow and the needs of this industry if I have to reinvent my mastering process with all new plugins every single time. Of course, from time to time, you want to go sample and try a new plugin and maybe add it to your arsenal. But once you got a good flow of things, you're like, you know what? I know that this series of plugin mastering plugins gets me at a loud volume, helps me have a nice spread out stereo image, gets me a nice clearly defined low end, whatever it is for you. Once you figure that out, and the only way you're going to find that out, by the way, is by doing it. There's not going to be a tutorial or somebody online, or even anything that you'll learn from somebody else that will give you your approach. You can definitely borrow from everybody's approaches, but you're not going to really know yours until you actually do it. So make sure you just try a whole bunch of stuff out till you find the right approach for you. And there's no right or wrong to this stuff, as long as on the end the output sounds high quality and it sounds on par with what you were doing, maybe mimicking, hopefully emulating that reference track. Label your tracks, for God's sakes. Don't have it just be track 1, track 2, track 3. It should be called kick, snare, hi-hat, cymbals, strings, horns. Keep things very organized. Use colors. Most DAWs you can organize, like all of your drums. I usually always go for a red color for my drums. Bass is usually purple. Piano is usually like yellow or green. Leads are usually pink or purple. So I have kind of like a color template that just works for me. So every time I open up any track that I've ever composed, I don't even have to necessarily read the tracks. I will if I need to, but I can just look and see, okay, this is where my leads are. This is where my drums are. So it just helps you navigate your own sessions, especially when it comes to your mixing and mastering process, much smoother when it's all extremely organized and also with colors. And use the least amount of tracks possible. This is kind of an overall philosophical approach that I've had to, slowly over the course of the last 15 years get better and better at. But if you can use one snare track rather than 2, just use 1. If you can use 1 piano sample rather than stacking it up with another piano sample, just use 1. If you can use 1 guitar lead rather than having a bunch of different ones all together, if you can have just 1 lead in your track rather than having to have multiple tracks trying to kind of different lead instruments sort of crowding up the track, just use the 1. In so many ways these days and forever, I think, with music, the least amount of instruments and music and tracks you can include in your overall mix, and still not sacrifice any of the emotion or the intensity or the dynamics, the stronger your track is going to be, because then you're really focusing on your writing, high quality chord progressions, high quality leads, great sounding drums, and great programmed drums, right? And amazing just dynamics with all of your instruments that are playing, even if it's a minimal track that doesn't have a lot going on, but just really taking the time and care for the few tracks and the few instruments that you do have in your session will make your music much more enjoyable to listen to, much more licensable, and much more just interesting and rich to listen to. I made the mistake so many times earlier in my career that it's like, well, my drums aren't hitting hard enough, so I better throw 3 more kicks on there. And I really did that. It's kind of ridiculous, but I'd have a sub kick, a low mid kick, and a high kick. And then don't get me started on snares and hi-hats and percussion and everything else that I was throwing on there. It just became a mess where my track eventually was just a loud, very noisy, and kind of jump it up mess. It just didn't sound that good. What I should have done is just gone back to the drawing board and get, I just need to get a really high quality sounding kick sample, just one kick track that has the low end thud that I want, has the mid range attack, and has a high end click that I really need. If I can't get it with 1, I'm maxing out at 2 then. I'm really just going to have a nice low mid kick, and that second one is going to basically just be the high end click for the attack on top of the mix. That's it, okay? So just focus on less rather than more. And for God's sakes, please use reference tracks. What's informing all of this, which would help you create your session and preload all of your samples and all that good stuff, is having a reference track in front of you. Well, if you don't know how to find a reference track, go to production music library websites. Most of them, I'd say 90% of them, are an open book in terms of you can go listen to all of their catalog. You can listen to the music that's going on there. That's what we give you guys with Sync Edge. We open up their websites and their catalogs, usually a source audio catalog, And I go through, at least on video, and show you what they currently have, what they're working with, the quality that they have. And I also want to point out in those videos what you should be paying attention to in terms of how long are these tracks. How do they build? What elements do they include? If there are vocals, what are the vocals doing that make them extremely licensable? If there's some weakness in the vocals, I try to point that out so that maybe you can bring something a little bit more high quality to them. But those are your reference tracks because those have already been vetted and proven to be licensable, or at least acceptable, by these companies that are allowing composers and producers and artists like you to partner with them. So go do your homework and find these reference tracks and basically not rip them off, not copy or steal anything that they're doing musically, but emulate them, meaning write down what kind of instruments do you hear in their track. First off, what are the qualities of those kick drums, of those samples, of those strings, of those horns? How loud is the track? How long is the track? How are they composing their chord progressions? Are they a short little 4-bar progression? Is it an 8-bar, a 16-bar? How are they treating lead instruments? When do the leads come in? How does the track start? Does it start very slow and gradual, or does it immediately get into the beef of it? How does the track end? Does it have a fade out? Does it have a hit definite ending? How are the transitions? What are the dynamics of this track when they have a buildup? What are all these instruments doing to create this tension and this intensity as the track builds up to maybe a big final third act or a chorus, right? These are the questions, and this is the kind of analysis you need to be composing and doing to make sure that if you're going to spend some time and a lot of time in your home studio, you are making something that's licensable and already kind of proven to be accepted by these sync licensing companies. That's why there's a lot you can control to increase your odds of getting accepted. Of course, there's no guarantee you do, but at least following with this kind of a strategy, you can at least minimize all of the reasons why they might say no, because you're basically following along with exactly what they've already said yes to. Okay, so this was our second video in the Creating Your Sync System series. What do you think about these so far? Have you been finding them useful, valuable, generating maybe new ideas, or maybe shaking up a little bit of your approach that maybe you didn't think about before? I'm really curious about that. Please leave your comments below. I'd love to hear what you think about it. I've got a few more coming your way. And again, the whole point of these videos is to get you from feeling like you get excited and then you don't get excited. You're really motivated and then you're not motivated, and not being accepted by libraries, to becoming a professional sync licensing producer where you're consistently showing up, consistently making music, and hopefully eventually, we're going to talk about in the next couple of videos, you're getting accepted by high quality, reputable companies and consistently cranking out music for them so you can actually get the ball rolling and become a serious player in this business. So we'd love to hear your thoughts if you guys are finding this useful. Thank you so much.